Testing, testing. 1, 2, 1, 2. Looks like we're passing signal. Testing, testing. 1, 2, 1, 2. Yeah. Super late? Well, it's a stream. It's going to be like 6 seconds after us, at least.
Oh. Hot mic.
Everyone looks great today, right? That's awesome. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Lisa Pettis, and I serve as the Assistant Vice President for Student Engagement and Success. And on behalf of our division's Vice President, Adrian Rodriguez, I'd like to welcome you to today's campus conversation. It is called Being an Ally to the LGBTQ plus community. This is a new series that we are hosting in collaboration with the Islander Cultural Alliance. Some of you may recall we had a session last month, or a couple of weeks ago. We're in the middle of October now. But it was called the Latinx Experience in Critical Race Theory. And so we are continuing the conversation today with these fine panelists, so thank you for joining us. I'd also like to bring your attention to the flyer that's on your tables. We will be continuing the conversation in a couple of weeks on October 20th with Campus Conversations, the Invisible Disability. So I ask that you please mark your calendars for that. So again, thank you for being here. I'm going to turn the mic over to Danielle. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Danielle Gonzalez with the Islander Cultural Alliance. On behalf of ICA, I'd like to welcome those of you in the room and those joining us virtually to this campus conversation, Being an Ally to the LGBTQ plus community. I come to you today from the geographic area colonized as Corpus Christi, Texas, USA, a coastal community bordering the Gulf of Mexico. This space on Turtle Island was originally inhabited by the Ndi or Lipan Apache, the Karankawa, and the Coahuiltecan people, among those whose tribal and nation names we have unfortunately forgotten. Our gratitude for the land and water and to the indigenous people who have and who continue to steward both. May we all commit today to eradicate the erasure of indigenous cultures wherever we live. We are streaming today's event and ask that all participants, those with us in person and virtually, submit your questions for the panelists using slido.com website. Use the event code ALLY. We want you to be part of the conversation and encourage you to submit questions. I would now like to introduce our moderator, Mr. John LaRue. Mr. LaRue serves as the Chief Compliance Officer at the university and has been instrumental in helping us put together today's discussion. Mr. LaRue.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us today. John LaRue, by the way. Mr. LaRue is my dad. But thank you all for joining us. I am John LaRue. I'm the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer here at A&M-Corpus Christi. I identify as gay. My pronouns are he and him. A little personal background on myself. I grew up here in Corpus Christi and moved back here recently in 2017 with my husband, who's currently a nursing student. And I also serve on the Board of Directors for Equality Texas, which is an LGBTQ plus statewide rights organization here in the state. Before we start our discussion, I'd like to give each of our panelists a chance to introduce themselves. And also, as a heads up, I'm going to be checking my phone. It's for the Slido. I'm not being rude and texting anyone. So as you submit your questions, they'll be coming in on my phone. But we'll start and introduce our panelists.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Daniel Bartholomew. I'm an assistant professor of sociology here at TAM-UCC. My pronouns are he, him, his. I have identified as queer for the last several years. I came out originally as gay over a decade ago, so maybe something I can talk about today was this transition in my sexual identity. My research and teaching predominantly focus on the study of social inequalities, predominantly at the intersections of the LGBT plus community, pertaining to health disparities, family relationships, and intersections with race and gender identities. I'm excited to be part of this panel. I'm originally from a small town in North Dakota, so I grew up in a very politically and culturally conservative region, which definitely shaped my trajectory to being part of the LGBT plus community. And it's really exciting to see TAM-UCC and colleges and universities around the United States open up to these conversations. So I'm excited to be here today and share more about my experiences.
You're like way too cool. Hi, my name is Elisa Nahosa. I'm the PR and social media manager for the ISSG here on campus. We're really cool, check us out. I identify as queer or pansexual. Gender-wise, I'm pretty fluid, so I go by she, they most days. And I'm really happy to be here. This is cool.
I I'm Kitana Sanchez. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a transgender woman, Latina transgender woman. I actually began my transition here at the university. So thank you all once again for allowing a safe space for LGBTQIA plus people to live their authentic lives. I always tell people about that. I'm originally from Del Rio, Texas. Like I said, I moved here in 2007, graduated from Texas A&M-Corpus Christi, and currently I am a co-facilitator for the Coastal Bend Trans Alliance. I'm also the vice president for Corpus Christi LGBT, and your current reigning Miss Gay Texas Universe, on my way to Nationals Miss Universe in November. So part of my, thank you, part of my platform is LGBTQIA+, going towards equality and also representing the trans community. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Elvia Aguilar. I'm the Assistant Director of Alumni Relations here at the Island University. Part of my role is to make sure that our current students and then our alumni know that we're all part of the Islander family, that we're all welcomed and that we're all loved. And so as a member of the LGBTQ community, I identify as gay. There are people in my family who I've not verbalized that to, who haven't asked the question. I haven't given the information, but I live my life pretty truthfully. Everybody that knows me here at work and the people that I come across pretty much know who I am and try to live as openly and truthfully as possible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. We will dive in and we'll start with kind of the topic of the day, which is what does being a member of the LGBT community mean to you, and what does allyship to that community mean?
I'll jump in. So to me, being part of the LGBT plus community has had kind of a checkered past. Growing up, like I said, I was raised in a pretty conservative environment, and so there was a lot of shame and guilt associated with my early years in understanding my sexuality, so much so that I didn't even consider the possibility that I would be part of the LGBT plus community until I moved away and went to college. I didn't meet another LGBT plus person until I was 18 years old. And so I think there's a lot of truth to that saying you can't be what you can't see. I just didn't have the lived experiences to even identify or have the mental capacity to consider that I could be anything other than heterosexual. And so at first there was a lot of shame and guilt associated with it, but the more people I started to meet, the more open and inclusive I realized that the LGBT plus community at large could be, the easier it started to be out and proud with my identity. And so to me, being an LGBT plus person today is just the most radiant and proud aspect of my identity. And I recognize that a lot of the privileges with the other intersections of my identity enable me to be out and proud. Being a white, cisgender, able-bodied man affords me a lot of protections in my life that make it easier for me to publicly say, yes, I identify as queer, and here's my story. So it's a checkered past, and it's something that is continuously evolving. And the second part of that, I think, when I think of being an ally to this community, I think of the people that have had a really transformative impact in serving as an ally to me in my experience. And those were the people that went beyond just saying they were an ally and actually doing the work of being an ally. So people that reach out and check in on their LGBT plus friends and say, how are you doing? People that attend events like National Coming Out Day and do the tabling, even if they aren't part of the LGBT plus community, but they're there in solidarity, attending protests and rallies, reaching out to Congress people to pass legislature that protect the rights of LGBT plus people. I think allyship should be considered more of an action rather than just a static identity. So the more we can inspire people to do the work of supporting marginalized groups, the better the lived experiences of LGBT plus people will be.
I'm going to answer the question a little bit backwards. I'm going to talk about the allyship component. I think being an ally is someone who's respectful and kind, whether you're part of the LGBT community, whether you're not part of the LGBTQI community, and being able to understand that everybody is in a different journey, in a different path to where they are. For some people, they want to have a coming out party and tell the whole world about it. Other people, it's a daily decision that they make. And so I think that being an ally is being understanding of where people are in their journey and being okay with that and just letting things evolve as they do. Kind of like Daniel, I've always had a sense of otherness. It wasn't necessarily related to me being gay. I grew up in a neighborhood where gangs were shooting at each other. There were drug deals going on a regular basis. And then I end up at Baylor University on a full ride scholarship where there are students that drive cars that are better than the ones that the professors drive. And so I was always kind of outside of the box. That feeling of otherness had always been there, and I couldn't quite pinpoint whether it was because of my socioeconomic status, some of the institutionalized or systemic discrimination that existed and exists, being the youngest of a Hispanic Catholic family, the expectation of staying home with mom and dad, getting married and having a bunch of children. All of those things I think played into where I am today and continue to play where I am today. So to be an ally is to be able to understand people like me and to kind of let us go along the way as we think is best for our everyday life.
So being a part of the LGBTQI plus community, personally, I appreciate, and I've learned over the years, the history that we've had, the trials and tribulations that we face, especially trans women of color. It's learning about the experiences of these people and also what they had to go through their process of transition. A lot of people, I know I have my privileges as well. Like I said, when I was here, it was slightly easier for me to transition, and I know some of my other trans siblings don't have it as easy. So when I'm able to get close to them, understand them, and that way I'm being an ally, I always tell them, I'm here for you, whatever you need, call my name, pretty much. But like I said, the history, I've really enjoyed reading about how far we've come as an LGBTQI plus community. The trials and tribulations, like I said, that we've overcome, and especially now with, like we were saying, like you said earlier, Daniel, about the bills that are being passed through legislation. I think it's very important that that history continues to, that we triumph over that and we continue to progress towards equality. And also being an ally is, you know, like the panelist said earlier, you know, just checking in on one another, making sure that you're there for each other, because we are a chosen family. We have this, you know, this term that we say amongst ourselves, that we are your chosen family. If your blood family does not accept you, we will accept you.
I love y'all. You took the words right out of my mouth, because to me, belonging to this community, it's not just about like who I'm loving romantically or sexually or how I feel gender-wise. I feel very held by my community. I feel very privileged that I feel held by my community. And I know that as a younger member of the LGBTQIA plus 2, I'm learning there's a 2 now, community, I sit on the shoulders of giants. You know, there's so many people who did so much of the grueling footwork it took for us to even be here. And for me to be able to speak on this campus, like out and happy and like feeling very comfortable, it's kind of a miracle. You know, not the other day, I say everything's the other day. A few months ago, me and my best friend found out that he was now living with HIV. And that was, in the moment, really crazy feeling, because, you know, your mind kind of flashes back to all the pictures you saw of, like, you know, HIV wards in the 80s and all the funerals and the AIDS quilt and all that stuff, and you get so scared. But we're lucky enough to be in a generation where there are so many of us who did so much of the hard work for us that, you know, he has the option to get on a helpful cocktail of medications. He can live a long and happy, fulfilled life, you know, even with his status. And to me, that's what this community means. I get to be there for him, he gets to be there for me, and we get to live our truths together. And I know there are so many of you in this room who may have had similar experiences, and I hope you feel comforted in the fact that I'm here for you, we're here for you, and even if we're not blood related, we are your chosen family. Reach out, we're here. And for those of us who are allies, I realize it's hard for people to come to terms with the different lifestyles of other people. Depending on where you come from, it can be shocking. But, it comes down to, well, for me, actions. Words are very sweet, and I always appreciate kindness. But in the moments where you're feeling really down and very lost and you're not sure where to turn, the actions of others can make all the difference. Checking in on somebody again, marching shoulder and shoulder with us for, better legislation or equal rights. Even within the community, I feel like we have a responsibility to be good allies to each other because our experiences are all very different. And it comes down to our empathy and our kindness to be able to reach out across the aisle. And we can't just pretend like, we're all rainbows and sunshine. We have a lot of issues of our own, and I feel like when we're united and standing together, we're a lot stronger. We can get a lot more done. That's allyship.
Awesome. Thank you all. I'm going to take a question from Slido. What does the term queer mean, and how is it different from the word gay?
I got this.
I was going to say, I think we know who's going to know the answer for this.
So the word queer probably brings about many different responses to people. As you may be aware, it was originally used as a homophobic slur, predominantly geared towards effeminate presenting gay men. And it had a really negative connotation attached to it for a long time because it was being used by people in powerful positions in society, particularly privileged identities with gender and sexuality, heterosexual, cisgender people, as a word to oppress and disenfranchise members of the LGBT plus community. Somewhere around the 80s into the 90s, kind of at the peak of the AIDS epidemic, a group of LGBT plus people started to kind of collectively mobilize underground scenes in large cities like New York and San Francisco and Chicago. And they started to realize how the power of that word really lie in the hands of the oppressor. And so they were really passionate about reclaiming that word and using it as a tool of social activism and social justice to kind of take away that oppressive power that that word had. So using it as this rhetorical tool to reclaim it as part of the LGBT plus community instead of being this oppressive tool that it was. And as a result of that, queers fight back, we're here, we're queer, get used to it. All of these adages that you may be familiar with started to be used at these rallies, largely in result with ACT UP and AIDS activism and awareness. And the LGBT plus community kind of started to circle around this term and to hold on to it and value it as something that meant an LGBT plus identity of any capacity that goes against the norms of expectations for gender and sexuality. So today, queer has multiple definitions, and if you talk to 50 LGBT plus people, you'll probably get 50 different explanations of what it means. But by and large, I understand queer as being kind of an inclusive umbrella term for anyone who has a gender or sexual identity that deviates against the norm. So if you're not heterosexual or cisgender identified, you can identify underneath this umbrella term of being queer. The reason I particularly like the term and why I choose to identify it is because I think it's more inclusive and disruptive of this expectation that there are only two genders, man or woman, and there's only two sexualities, straight or gay. I used to identify as gay, and the older I got, the more I learned and researched about the LGBT plus community, the more I realized that identifying as gay to me felt like I was almost feeding into this expectation that you had to be straight or gay and that there was no gray area in between. And so for me, queer is more of an inclusive term. It represents this kind of call to activism that really motivated me to become an active member of the LGBT plus community. And I appreciate its historical context, so much so that there's actually an entire social theory, queer theory built around it now that's the foundation a lot of my research that I work on as a sociologist. So those are my personal connections to it, but I think another important thing to recognize is that it still does carry a negative connotation to a lot of members of our community, especially of older generations, whose initial exposure to it wasn't necessarily one of collaboration and of activism, but rather it was this oppressive homophobic tool. So it's not a term that I would recommend our allies throw about lightly. If you know a person in our community who identifies as queer, I think it becomes acceptable to use that term, but it is an oppressive tool still used against us. It can be used still as that homophobic slur. So it's one of those kind of touchy words, and I think it's a great thing to have conversations about in this environment or in other safe environments. But for me, it's just a more inclusive and representative term that encompasses all of the variations within the LGBT plus community.
I totally agree with that. That was beautiful. For me, identifying under the term queer, it's very empowering. I think for a lot of us who were growing up and were kind of like, obviously a little bit, sitting somewhere on the rainbow spectrum, we got a lot of insults hurled our way. I know I had more than my share of slurs. I didn't realize it, but growing up, all of my friends were very queer. We were the gay kids, literally the group. And as I got older, it started to hurt less and less. And to me, using humor and being able to take those terms and kind of occupy it as my own became a source of healing. I loved using the term queer as an identification for myself because, again, I love that it's an umbrella term. I love that it's me taking power back from somebody who is intentionally trying to hurt my community. And I believe that for a lot of people, gender and sexuality is a fluid kind of just journey throughout your life. And I feel like labels put a lot of pressure on people to kind of stick in one way. And if you're always like, oh, this is my label now, or oh, this is my label now, it devalues your words in the eyes of others. Does that make sense? It makes you look kind of wish-washy, like you don't know what you want, but that shouldn't matter. You are you, and as long as you know that, then we're all good. And as far as queer as a label being derogatory, I understand that. I have, being in our club, the Islander Spectrum of Sexuality and Gender, ISSG, we have a lot of younger members, and when they hear me identify as queer, when I was introducing myself in our group chat, I had a lot of people going, is it okay that you say that? And I was like, but I am. I'm sorry. And we had to have this talk where, people have different journeys and words will mean different things to different people, that as members of our community, if I identify as queer, I'd hope that you would respect that, because I don't use that term lightly. As a history major, I sit with, the details of our past, and I understand that, but again, it's because of all the hard work that people did before us that I get to use that and I get to feel good about it. That's mine now, and I think we should respect that about each other. That's how I feel about it.
I'm going to kind of combine two questions from Slido that are similar. And it's, how can allies advocate for the LGBTQ plus community without speaking for them, and also when combating bigotry towards the community?
I don't mean to speak again immediately after I just spoke, but I literally had dinner with my father last night, and he's one of those people where he loves me very much, but, and there's a but, there's always a but. I tell him, about my living situation and how I identify, and I'm, an officer of this club now, and I do a lot of community work where I'm very involved with a lot of different people from a lot of different places. And I'm so lucky that I've got to meet people like Katana. I hope I get to see you all the time now. But, he chooses to use a lot of unkind language around me, knowing how I identify. That can be really hurtful. Slurs aplenty. I'm trying to enjoy my food here. Please stop. I think a lot of this, the best that we can do and the best that you can do as allies is you got to put your foot down. I think learning and education is the best tool we have against bigotry. So as unpopular as it may sound, speaking with kindness to people, reaching out across the aisle, just kind of being like, hey, that's not so nice, instead of, kind of raging immediately. Because I understand the anger, I get really upset. But if you want to change someone's mind, they have to be listening to you first. As far as speaking for us, that's kind of hard for me, because I get into these moments, and I'm guilty of it, where, you know, you hear something going on, you want to advocate for somebody else, you're the only one there. It's hard to check yourself. Just keep in mind that we love your help. Please be kind. Do your best to speak to your knowledge. Don't feel like you need to overexert. I'm happy for the help. We're all learning together. That's how I feel.
I feel that allies need to recognize their privilege, first and foremost. Like we've always said, you know, the LGBT plus community has always faced trials and tribulations. I've had situations where certain allies from our community have pretty much put themselves in a position where they feel, if we try to say, okay, like an LGBT space like this, and we say, okay, well, allies are welcome, but then they start to talk over us, or they try to, you know, implement their own kind of like ideas and moment. It's like, we have to constantly remind them, you know, remember where you came from and remember where we came from and what we're doing. We're trying to push towards equality, and we need to kind of like meet in the middle. So don't overstep your bounds. You know, also it's okay to like ask questions. Go ahead and be like, is it okay for me to say this? Is this appropriate for me to approach this situation in this way? So like I said, I think one of the main things is check your privilege before you kind of like really decide to want to help and be a part of the LGBTQ plus community as an ally.
I'll just add one quick thing to kind of build off this. I think it's really important reflecting on your own privileges that we have, even within the community, to know when to speak out and when to use those privileges to help amplify the voices of other members of the community. You know, as again, a white cisgender man, I shouldn't be a spokesperson for the experiences of queer and trans people of color. So instead of, you know, accepting opportunities to speak at events pertaining to kind of unique subgroups and subcultures within our community, maybe I could use my resources to reach out to members of the community that I know that could be better representation for that. Again, I think representation is so important. So if we have white cisgender gay men doing 90% of the public speaking at events, that's representing one demographic within what's supposed to be this broad, inclusive LGBT plus community. So knowing when to speak out and when to use your privilege behind the scenes to help amplify the voices of the groups that are experiencing unique intersections of marginalization is a really important aspect of being an ally and not overstepping those boundaries.
And I think sometimes you have to be smart and figure out who those allies are, and given the situation as well. And Dr. Dan, I know you like Daniel, but one of the things that we talked about briefly before this presentation was South Texas in general and some of the topics that affect us, the machismo culture, those types of things. And so it's really hard in a place like Corpus Christi, Texas sometimes to realize, do you work behind the scenes and educate and get things on agendas or in our state legislature, so forth and so on, or do you stand outside and protest with a sign and mobilize the people around you to take certain action and things like that? And that plays into what we have to do on a regular basis. Sometimes I have found in my experience where it's better where I go behind a closed door and talk to somebody and say, this is why this is not a good move. This is why you're unintentionally and sometimes intentionally discriminating against a group of individuals, not just LGBTQI, but different types of populations or minority groups. And so it's a fine balance of when do you work behind the scenes and educate, when do you stand with a sign and walk the streets of Corpus Christi to speak out in favor or against an action.
How do you feel when a friend who claims to be an ally doesn't act like one?
A little miffed, to put it nicely. I try not to get angry. To me, that's a learning moment, you know. That's you kind of talking to your friend later and going, hey, that wasn't so cool of you. Again, like a lot of the stuff that we face, we need to be facing together. If someone messes up, that's a learning moment. If they don't want to learn, then they're not an ally. and that's just that. You know, maybe they're not as good of a friend as you thought they were, but kindness, and then you draw a line. I have a hard time being mean to people.
I kind of like feel the same way. I think, you know, as much as, I don't know, I mean, going through, you know, through life and just kind of interacting with different identities, different people, learning that containing that kind of like negative energy in yourself is really not healthy. You have to find a way to be somewhat positive and just find the light within you from preventing you from doing something brash to your friend. But I think, like you said, I think having a good sit-down conversation with somebody and telling them, look, you know, we're both adults in this situation. I think, you know, we need to come to terms with this and just realize, you know, and it's like I always tell people, if I'm doing something, you know, wrong, please let me know. You know, if I've said something to offend you, please let me know. You know, and I think that's just part of like maturing as an individual. You know, you want to be able to communicate with people. So I think communication is always key when it comes to something like that.
I think the best adults are kind of empathetic. The people who want to know if they messed up, the people who want to learn and do better. That makes you a cool person, in my book.
Be confident and be comfortable in your own skin. I think that's a daily goal for all of us, regardless of where we are. And so I think a lot of it is depending on who the person is that has hurt you, communicate the information to them, let them know how you feel about it. But if it's somebody that you don't necessarily need in your life, or that you don't think educating or giving background information about a certain idea or topic is, then move along your daily life and don't spend the time trying to befriend or have someone in your life that is not necessarily someone you need to have anyway.
It's okay to cut out toxic people.
It's actually a lot of fun. It's like cutting off dead hair.
How important is it to y'all that an ally or a person who's not part of our community lists their pronouns? And whether that's in an email signature or when we're doing introductions or whatever form that takes.
It makes me feel comfortable to know that it's just, okay, let me break this down a different way. Say you're the only person who has to announce their pronouns in the entire class because otherwise everyone will be misgendering you or, you know, using the wrong pronouns. That makes you feel really othered. It makes you feel really alienated, like everyone's looking at you like the weird kid in class, you know. It makes you more likely to be taken less seriously because everyone goes, you know, it's easier to dismiss you. But when it becomes part of our introductions and our professors are using it, and, you know, it's in all of our business emails, I find that I know I'm in a safe space and that I don't have to feel uncomfortable or strange and that others can feel the same too. Even if like you're cis or, you know, whatever, like understand that you're creating a place where people feel comfortable being themselves. So even if you're not the odd one out, you're making a comfortable area for those who may feel like they are.
I think it's, a very powerful symbol, and it's something that's very simple. Something as easy as including a line on your signature for your email that says pronouns in use, he, him, his, they, them, their. Especially if you do identify within the gender binary and you assume, well, everyone is going to know what my pronouns are based on my appearance. By volunteering to offer them, to the point that was made, it makes it more comfortable for individuals who maybe don't have a clear binary gender presentation or choose to use they, them, their, or zisms or any other variation. So it's a really powerful symbol. Language is very powerful, you know. Not everyone has a rainbow unicorn t-shirt that they can wear to display that they are an ally, right? So something as simple as, you know, having that signature line, or when you meet someone for the first time, say, hey, my name is Daniel, I use he, him, his. When I volunteer my pronouns to someone, it is a symbolic identifier to them that I'm an ally and that it almost encourages them to introduce them with their pronouns. So I'm not making assumptions based off of how I'm categorizing them based off their appearance, because how we visually display our gender doesn't always line up with how we identify with our gender. So simple things like including our pronouns. Whenever I have a name tag anywhere, I'm always writing he, him, his below my name. When I'm introducing myself to people, I try and get in the habit of including my pronouns, and it oftentimes can be a great conversation starter because sometimes people get taken aback and are confused, like, what do you mean he, him, his? And then it's a great way that I can explain to them and do a little activism for the LGBT plus community and say, oh, well, you know, the way that we identify is individualistic, and by asking or volunteering my pronouns, I'm letting you know how I personally identify. You know, would you mind sharing your pronouns so I know how to refer to you? It's just a nice symbolic way of representing allyship. So I don't think it means you're a bad ally if you don't volunteer your pronouns, but it is a simple effort that we can do to help spread awareness for the community.
Absolutely.
I think of progress whenever I see it because so many times when you send an invitation out, and even in our work in the alumni relations world, we're being a lot more cognizant of what people's pronouns are, what their preferences, you know, in culture, social culture stuff you see, Mrs. Dawn Smith or something along those lines. And, you know, maybe the wife doesn't want to necessarily be tied to the husband in that regard. And so, or Dr. So-and-so. And so I think when we have the opportunity to give our pronouns, or those are, it's part of normal workplace culture and things like that, I think of progress, because it certainly wasn't the case, you know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So that's what I think about.
We love intersectionalism here.
I think it just comes down to respect, honestly, just having respect for one another, using pronouns. I know I've had to teach some of the elders of the community, of the LGBT plus community locally, because they're so set in their ways of, well, back in the 80s, excuse me, in the 90s, you know, nobody, you know, we never had this, we never had that, you know. I mean, it's not, okay, sorry,
Elders
I don't
of the
mean
90s
that.
feels like a
I
personal
don't mean
attack.
that in
I'm
that.
feeling called out. I'm feeling called out.
I'm talking about the elders of the community, of the LGBT plus community, who I've gotten to know. And, but with them, I've noticed they're, I'm sorry if I disrespected anybody by saying that. Didn't mean disrespect in any way. Now my ears are turning red. I'm like, oh God, what did I do? But I think it's also like a learning moment too. You know, it's another teachable moment, you know, and the language within our own community is always changing. At least I love learning about different languages, how, you know, words are formed, this, you know, throughout the culture. So I think it just comes down to respect and respecting the human being that you see in front of you. I mean, like we were saying earlier, you know, if you see somebody representing or presenting themselves as a certain gender, maybe they don't identify with that gender. Maybe they can't, you know, at that point in time in their life, they aren't able to, you know, really identify as their authentic self. So I think by somebody introducing themselves or using the pronouns and being like, hey, these are my pronouns, that probably like brings us a sense of comfort to the individual, and probably this sense of like unity, like, oh, here's another like chosen family member that I can identify with, that I can, you know, confide in at some point in my time, you know, some point in my life.
It really is like one of the simplest acts of inclusive kindness you can perform. Like 5 seconds, probably max, you know, hi, blah, 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 my name is, these are my pronouns, done.
So Elvia, there are 2 questions specifically toward you. You're very popular in the Slido chat, and I'm going to try and combine them into one. So you mentioned that not all of your family is aware and of your identity. What advice would you have for other Catholic Hispanic people in the same situation? And what were your feelings given that dynamic with today's conversation being live streamed?
So for me, it goes back to what I said earlier, being confident and comfortable in your own skin. I've reached a point in my time where I've been able to figure out who I am as a person, and I think that that's more important than whatever label you throw in front of me, because I could be a Hispanic, I could be a female, I could be from a poor background, from a rich background, whatever labels you want to throw. It's not the first time, like I explained earlier, that otherness has been, or the feeling of otherness has been within me. For me, spiritual and religious growth has been a huge deal because I am a Christian. I am a lover of Jesus Christ. I believe that, Jesus loves me exactly for who I am. And that's all been a process. And so for me, I have found the confidence in that what I do every day, how I live my life every day, is in the most truthful and honest and a way of integrity. And so I try to show through actions who I am. And regardless of who in my family knows, who may suspect but has not asked me, I think that that's going to become a point that how you choose to live your life, you are going to come into the situation where that conversation will lend itself. And if it doesn't, in the case of my 81-year-old mother that is a dialysis patient who's never been able to verbalize who I've never been able to say the words "I am gay" to my 81-year-old mother. She very much knows who I am as a person. She knows that my partner and I have been together for 13 years. She's invited to Christmas and Thanksgiving and everything. But I also understand what generation she came from and where she grew up and the thoughts and belief systems that came. So if I'm asking to not be put in a square box and a round peg in a square box, however that term is, then I shouldn't ask the same of her. And so I feel that a lot of that has been part of my journey. And so why I did this today is because I am who I am. The people in our community know who I am, and I care about the Islander community. And so if I say those things, I need to show those things. And so that's why I chose to be here today.
Thank you. Had me tearing up, sorry. How can cisgender and heterosexual people do better for the LGBTQ plus community?
Don't be a jerk.
Sounds like a bumper sticker. Put a little rainbow on the end and we got it.
That's true. I mean, if you see injustices being done, to the LGBT plus community, and especially if you have family members, friends, loved ones that are part of it, speak out. I mean, if you have the voice, you're able to speak out against those injustices. It's that simple. I mean, you may face a lot of hardships when you do speak out, because we do have people, that don't agree with, the LGBTQIA plus community. However, I mean, that's how progression is made.
Just be kind. My mind blanked. Blame the ADHD. What was the question again?
How can cisgender heterosexual people do better for the LGBTQ plus community?
Okay, so you have certain privileges that a lot of us don't, and you get to be in circles and socialize in places that we might not be welcome. So when you're there, if you hear something kind of crappy, stick up for us. Be kind to people, be empathetic to their wants and personal labels. It really comes down just to being a decent person and respecting the boundaries and wants of others. Easy.
What advice do you have for people who've not come out yet? And as allies within the LGBT community, so what advice do you have for those who haven't come out yet? And as you were coming out, whether it was with an ally or someone who you weren't necessarily sure about, who did you lean on, and how did you start those conversations?
Coming out is a very individualistic experience, so there's no one-size-fits-all response to this. My biggest piece of advice to anyone that's considering disclosing their gender or sexual minority status to anyone is to make sure that you have a safety backup net in place. This is especially important for LGBT plus youth. LGBT plus youth account for something like 40% of the homeless youth in the United States, even though they only represent about 10% of the youth population. And a large catalyst of that is because members of our community often get kicked out of their households. They're no longer welcome by their families. So if you are a youth, if you're still dependent on your parents or your guardians, I would make sure that you have a place to go, have a friend or a family member that's willing to support you and take you in if you need that, or be independent on your own. I waited until I had my own apartment and was able to provide for myself before I disclosed to any of my family, because I wasn't sure how they were going to respond. Coming from a Catholic, culturally conservative household where I was told since I was a child that I was going to burn in hell if I was gay, that wasn't something I was comfortable or felt safe disclosing. I also started by kind of prioritizing the people that I told. I went to my closest friend first, the person that I felt like I could tell anything to and they wouldn't judge me. And that felt safe to me. And then I worked up towards friends who I thought would probably be okay, but still had a little bit of doubt. And I waited to tell my most conservative friends and family last. And by that point, I had built up enough self-love and had felt like I had a big enough support system that even if those friends and family members were going to exclude me or ostracize me or kick me out of my family or my friendship circles, I was in a space where I felt safe enough that I didn't need them. And it's a continuous process too. I don't think that's something that's talked a lot about. People think, oh, you just come out of a big rainbow door and then the rest is history. No, I continue to come out every single day. We all do, right? People, every interaction we have, people try and position us and figure out who we are. And it gets to a point where every individual just needs to decide if they want to disclose their identity to people, if it's something that's important to you. I choose to do it, like I said, as much as I can because I have a privileged identity. I work in a privileged environment where I feel safe and open to do so, but that's not the case for everyone. For some people, coming out is very dangerous. And so make sure you have a support system and make sure that you have enough love for yourself. You know, if you can't love yourself, how the hell are you gonna love somebody else, as RuPaul says?
Amen.
I mean, it's very true. You need to be comfortable within your own skin before you're willing to disclose this really vulnerable part of your identity to other people. And there's no rush. I know we're talking today about the power of being out and open and being allies, but some people take longer than others. Some people will never feel fully comfortable, and that's okay. Just find your support system, find your chosen family, and try and live in your own truth and take care of yourself.
Know that there are resources out there for you as well. You know, you can go online, research what type of LGBT centers there are locally or whatever city you're in, research them, you know, and go ahead and, you know, reach out to them for help. They also have counseling there as well, like we do here with the Colespin Wellness Foundation. So don't be afraid to go ahead and reach out. And like Daniel was saying, you know, we do have times in our lives where we're constantly coming out. I mean, for me, growing up in a small border town, I never imagined being able to live, I guess, my life authentically as I am now. I grew up also in a conservative, you know, Catholic household, and I'm the only child. So right there, you know, I think my parents had all these expectations for me, and when I approached them about, you know, my situation, my identity, it was kind of rough in the beginning, but eventually, and I think for me, I kind of like, in that sense, I kind of rebelled for the first time against them because I gave them an ultimatum. I was already attending here at A&M. I kind of like had established myself slightly, but I told them, you know, when I went home one summer, I said, if you don't accept me, I'm totally fine with, you know, cutting all communication. But that only came from seeing previous LGBT plus people and their situations. So I thought, you know, just nip it at the butt. If they're gonna, you know, not love you at this point, then it's okay. And I was okay in myself knowing that, hey, if my parents said, you know what, we want nothing to do with you, then that was fine. I knew I had chosen family in Corpus Christi that I could get together with and, you know, progress in my life. But I think that threw my parents for a huge shock because the first response was like, my father was like, I don't want to lose you. You're my only child. You know, and eventually, you know, it took my mother a little bit longer because of her Catholic upbringing and all that, but she did come around. And I mean, now both my parents and I, we have a great bond. You know, we're constantly checking in on each other. And of course, as they're aging, I feel like I really have to be there for them. So, and also too, like with them, with family members that are accepting, they start to learn about the community more, especially if they had no knowledge of it before. I've had multiple conversations with my parents where, you know, back home they're saying, oh, so-and-so has, you know, an individual, you know, son, daughter, nephew, niece, what have you, in their family, and they're LGBT plus. You know, asking me for advice, when I would ask my parents for advice, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, this is a teachable moment, and I let them know, I'm like, this is what you do, so, and it's just great to kind of have that now, but know that you do have, again, you have chosen family that can be there for you when you're coming out. So don't be, I want to say don't be afraid, but I guess like use caution, and again, like pick and choose who you want to let into your circle when you have that experience of coming out.
Be patient with yourself. It's a process. It takes a long time. It takes a while. You don't have to it's like we tell our first year students, you don't have to pick your major and that's what you're going to do for the rest of your life. You're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to go through different experiences. There's a lot of good Melissa Etheridge and Indigo Girls CDs that you can listen to. I'm dating myself by saying those things. But when I was growing up, I mean, there was Ellen, there was Melissa Etheridge, and that was pretty much it. And our society has changed in a way to where there are, like Katana said, more resources out there. And I think representation matters. So I think that as you go along in your journey and you figure yourself out, it's okay to be vulnerable, but unfortunately you also have to be strategic, and you also have to learn where the safe spaces are and where they're not, and where it's okay to kind of keep it in the back of your mind and not necessarily disclose right away, but then when it's time to do it, to be forthcoming. So I think be patient with yourself is probably my biggest advice.
I don't think anybody should be rushing themselves outside of like what they feel comfortable with. I know we live in like a way more accepting society than we have in like recent decades, and I think it's only going to keep getting better, but that doesn't mean everything's perfect. I've been privileged enough to get to meet a lot of different people, and with that comes often with them feeling comfortable enough to tell me how that went for them, and it's not often pretty. We have a club member, their parents performed an exorcism on them. It didn't work. They're still gay. But a big part of it, I believe, is strategy. Like, for myself, I didn't just, do what all the kids on TikTok are doing and make a cake that says, I'm queer, deal with it. I slowly, strategically came out to my family and the people I could trust. Unfortunately, I wish I could have done it better because my sister accidentally outed me while trying to come out herself. And so we were both kind of sitting there like, sorry. But, if you find yourself in a position where you're not sure, I would say trust your gut. I don't like to encourage fear, but I would say exercise caution. I think being safe is better than being sorry. Again, make sure you have your safety net, make sure you have your support system. If living your truth is a privilege for a lot of people, where it's all a lot of fun and people are going to be very kind to you, but I know that's not everybody, and if you're one of those people where it's not going to be all sunshine and rainbows, you need to be ready. If you want to live your truth, it's not going to be cute all the time, and I wish you all the luck. And to the people who don't feel comfortable coming out right now or ever, that's your personal choice, and I want to say you are still very loved and you are very valid, and should that ever change and you want to be there, we'll be there for you. I hope that you would feel comfortable doing whatever you wanted. It's your life.
So I think we probably have time for one or two more questions. I'm going to ask one that might be kind of an interesting dynamic given the topic of today's conversation, but what if someone feel it violates their conscience to use someone's preferred pronouns?
Like if you're wrong using people's pronouns that they want?
Yep.
You're wrong for that. I just feel like that's a little disrespectful. If it's a religious thing or it's just part of your background where you it's a small want to not do it, I'd say if you like this person or it's worth your time, tweak it. Slowly change over time. You'll get used to it. Or if this is a place where you just, it's intolerance and what I would call almost hate, you don't have to be friends with us. And if you can't use proper pronouns, don't talk to us.
I would challenge that person and ask them how they would feel if I misgendered them. So if they identified as a man and went by he, him, how would they feel if everyone in their life started calling them she instead of he? You know, gender is something that we are socially conditioned to understand in this binary status from the day we're born in our society. And that's something that's being challenged with more people identifying as queer and trans and non-binary. So much so that they, them, there is now recognized in the dictionary as a form of gender pronouns, singularly, not just referring to groups of people. So challenge that person. How would you feel if everyone in your life misgendered you every single day? Your gender is just as much a part of your identity, identifying within the gender binary, as it is for people who maybe identify beyond the gender binary or identify with a gender different than the one that they were assigned at birth. And our identities become really intrinsic aspects of who we are and how we navigate the worlds that we live in. So a simple act of respect by identifying people the way they want to be treated is something that you would expect people to observe for yourself. So a little bit of empathy, putting yourself in another person's shoes and considering how you would feel if this was something that was affecting you in that way.
So we've got 4 minutes left, and rather than ask another question, I thought I would give y'all a chance to give maybe closing thoughts, anything that we haven't discussed that you want to bring up on how to be an effective ally, or...
I'd like to bring up something that has been experienced, at least what I've seen from the LGBT plus community locally. Even though, you know, we always say we're a family, we come together to, you know, fight towards equality. Sometimes there is that internal drama that we deal with one another. So it's kind of hard when you have like somebody you're both from the community and you want to progress, but they don't necessarily understand what your experience is and what you're going through, even though you understand theirs. So it's always like muddy waters with that. And I always think that's what prevents us from actually like progressing more as a community towards equality. So it's kind of like we have to like squash that from the get-go. I've had experiences where I've, believe it or not, experienced discrimination from my own my members of my community, simply for standing up and speaking out, you know, about my rights as a trans individual, and for whatever reason, they just didn't like it. And I've even had instances where an LGBT plus individual of the community has denied me, or pretty much said to me, to my face, well, as applying for a job position, and they looked at me in my face and they said, well, is there somebody more qualified? I'm like, I meet your specifications. I don't understand where this is going. We're both in this community. I'm trying to help you to be, you know, have more faces for what you're doing with your organization. Why am I not allowed, you know? And that's where I always think, like, you know, the privilege comes in, and I've never understood that. I've never understood why certain individuals just can't look past that kind of, you know, I guess the disagreements that we have and just move forward. But I just wanted to bring that up, that there is sometimes, you know, we have instances where that internal drama is there, and we just need to move forward.
No, yeah. I remember one of the first times I ever met another like LGBTQIA plus person in like a college class. I was like super excited. I was like, yay, a friend. And then we started talking, and she was like, yeah, I'm a lesbian. But also, I don't understand trans people, and I don't think they're valid. And I was like, whoa, okay, that's wild. And then it came down to them going, I just don't get it. And I was like, well, you don't have to get it. You know, you're probably never going to get it. You just have to be kind about it and, you know, respect other people. And it was like, nah. That's you're going to meet, you know, you're going to run into people like that. It's a matter of like, we're a really large community. It's made of a lot of different people from a lot of different places, and you don't need to get it, but if you could just show a little bit of kindness and empathy, you know, that'd be cool. It goes a long way.
Okay.
I think my closing thoughts are kind of along the same lines as Elise, where basically be kind to other people. You don't know where people's backgrounds are from, and even within our community, for me, as all of you take all the aspects of everybody's lives, right? And so where they grew up, what their religion was, just history, and so everybody comes from a different place. And so, as I said earlier, some people want to have coming out parties. other people are more flamboyantly gay than others, and that's okay. And I think that when you get to the point where you realize that everybody's at a different point in their lives, I think that that's when, and when you let people kind of live their lives the way they want to, I think that that's where ideally so much of these questions and discrimination will end.
Just quickly add that I think it's a huge privilege to be part of this Islander community where there are so many resources available for people that want to be allies, for people that are questioning their gender and sexual identity. We have organizations like ISSJ and ICA and the new Islanders for Social Justice that are really involved in activism and education. We have a Women in Gender Studies program here at this campus. Next semester, I'm teaching a brand new course on the sociology of sexuality that will impact a lot of the topics we're talking about here. There's organizations in the Coastal Bend community to serve our members and to provide opportunities for allies that want to get involved. So as with any aspect of privilege, don't take that for granted. If you have questions or want to be more involved, I'm sure you can reach out to any of us up here on this stage, and we're happy to be there as resources for you because we are a chosen family, and together we can accomplish a lot more than if we work at this individually.
Oh, real quick. If you ever go to any type of drag show, please tip your entertainers.
Tip the drag queens.
It's just $1 will go a long way, trust me.
Well, thank y'all to our panelists for joining us today. Thank you for those here in person, those of y'all watching on the live stream. Don't forget to stay tuned to iEngage for future events and discussion, and have a great Blues Day Tuesday.